sometime in the future.
Okay, so let's say hello everybody. So Dave, how many days have you been in Bangkok so far? And how many days in Southeast Asia?
Depends on if you count the nights, but I think 3.
What do you think so far? Good or bad things?
It's great. No, it's a lot of fun and definitely some talented folks. I was chatting with Moo for a little bit and also with Patai, who's doing built. Yeah, some really interesting startups and definitely seems like a very enthusiastic group of geeks. Except you're really quiet right now. It's such a bad.
Woo! Woo! Give me a woo! All right, so and where have you been this trip? Is this the last trip? Or this is the last trip?
No, we have.
This is the last stop.
It's not the last trip. It's Jakarta is our next stop tomorrow, and that'll be the last stop on the trip. So the group has been to Singapore, KL, here, and then Jakarta. Before that, I was actually individually in Japan and China for a couple weeks. So
I saw
spending the last month in Asia.
I saw the video of you dancing in Japan.
Oh, you did?
It's viral.
Okay.
So what's your impression of Southeast Asia's startup scene? How does it compare? So last in 2010, right? You were in East Asia, jumping around in Korea, Japan, and stuff. So what's your impression this time on Geeks on a Plane?
I've spent come to Singapore fairly frequently, about once or twice a year, and I'm in Asia, East Asia, at least twice a year. It's still developing, but definitely there's a lot of talent going on here. I think some of the stats in the last deck kind of illustrate the growth that's happening. Probably still some payment issues to kind of figure out over the next couple of years, but I don't think that's problematic. I think it's just maybe a matter of time. Probably the biggest issues, I think, which are not unusual, not dissimilar from other international geographies, is just having experienced entrepreneurs for mentorship and having access to capital and angel investors. So it looks like that's still developing, but definitely more folks active now in the region than there have been in the last 5 to 10 years.
Are we better than East Asia yet?
Are you better than East Asia?
I want to be better.
You know, I don't know that we're really concerned about who's better. You know, I think each country and geography and, you know, culture has its own merits and
do you have any favorite countries? Any favorite countries yet? Any countries that you hate as well? I'm curious.
Wow. I'm looking for the negative shit here.
I want the negative stuff.
As much as I love Singapore, sometimes there's a little too much rule following there. So, you know, the government does make a lot of finance and other great stuff available, but there's also a little less risk-taking in that culture. Haven't been to Indonesia yet, so I can't really say too much about that. I guess if you look out a little bit more, generally speaking, Japan and UK and Singapore are probably very formal structures and societies, and entrepreneurs there are a little less risk-oriented. I've had some fair amount of familiarity with Japan because my wife's from there. We've been investing there for 3-4 years. And really, if you look at Japan compared to Germany, you'd think there would be a lot more entrepreneurship going on, a lot more e-commerce startups, but there aren't. So I think that Japan's a really big opportunity in a lot of ways, and there have been successful both exits and very successful entrepreneurs in their country. In fact, Rakuten and SoftBank in particular have been almost one of the more active global startups in the last few years. So I don't know. There's lots of different experiences from all over the world. It's really been kind of an amazing opportunity in the last 3 or 4 years. I've probably visited close to 40 countries. We've invested in over 35 of them. And but I think Southeast Asia, generally speaking, is exciting because it's developing. So I mean, it's certainly not perfect. It's not a mature market. Not in the same sense that maybe the U.S. or Japan or UK is, but that's probably why it's more exciting, because I think the pace of change and the rate of adoption is probably more interesting than a market that's a little bit already fleshed out and completely mature, at least from an investing perspective.
What do you mean risk taking? Do we take more risks? How do you know who takes more risks?
I hesitate to make any judgments on an entire society after spending all like 72 hours here. I think there's a lot of variation within the culture. I might suggest that it feels like Thailand's a little bit more intuitive and creative than I would have guessed. I don't know whether that's from Buddhist culture or from other things, but I'm kind of optimistic about that, to the extent that that really is, reality and not just my perception. And I think that gives Thai entrepreneurs a little bit more flexibility in the way they approach problems and the way they come up with ideas. So that's actually a plus in my mind.
So, but that doesn't have to do anything to do with risk, though.
I've spent 3 days, so it's hard to say how risky people are.
Well, what do you mean when you say that Japan is not so risky? Because they have a lot of money and big companies.
Yeah, but I do have a pretty long history. I've been going back and forth to Japan for almost 15, 20 years now. And not that I spent a ton of time living there, it's usually for visits, but relative to opportunity, it's the number 2 or 3 online economy in the world, and the amount of entrepreneurship that's going on there is relatively small, which is why I think it's actually pretty exciting. There's a lot of opportunity if you're a smart entrepreneur in Japan. There's not too many people competing for that really, really big market, whereas if you look at someplace like China, everybody is competing for China, including lots of Chinese, and it's a very complicated place to do business if you're not Chinese. At least that's my impression. So as much as that's a really exciting market to go after, there's a lot of people working on it, and it's not simple, and it's probably been a little bit overpriced. China, yeah. Whereas I would say Japan's kind of the opposite. I think Japan's probably underpriced and lots of opportunity relative to the size of entrepreneurial market.
And you guys just started getting into China. Or you just got a person in
We've
there?
been investing slowly in China over the last 2 years, I guess. We have 4 or 5 investments there, well, a few more now. But we just hired someone in Beijing, Raymond. She actually had to leave this morning, but she's been with the group. So I think having a native speaker on the ground in Beijing will probably give us a little bit more sense of what's going on. But China's just a lot different than most other geographies. One of the advantages we have in being in Silicon Valley is we have really strong and very long relationships with a lot of platform companies in the valley. So, I've probably spent close to 15, 20 years with a lot of folks who've been in and around Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. My partner Christine worked at Google and YouTube for about 7 years. So we know a lot of the people at those platform companies. Some of them are our mentors and some of them are investors. And so even if we're not in international geographies, it's still probably the case in 2/3 of the world, maybe even more. Google's the platform for search, Facebook and Twitter are platform for social, Android and Apple are the platforms for mobile, YouTube for video. So it gives us an opportunity to have an advantage in international markets because we know a lot of those local platforms. In China, it's very different. It's Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, Sina, so we don't have those connections there yet, and we're still building those relationships, so that takes time. A few other differences maybe in Korea and Russia, but not as dramatic as China.
That's actually a perfect segue to my next big question is, so the Silicon Valley has a lot of different kinds of lessons, like lean startup or different principles or all this stuff, right?
Some of those are good and some of those are bad.
Some of those are good, some of those. What's bullshit for Asia? What can't be applied in Asia? I always wonder, because
I don't think it's just bullshit for Asia. I think there's a lot of bullshit for the US too.
Can you write a list of them?
Well, so the one that's been on my mind lately is just, I think there's a tendency to copy stuff in the US that looks sexy. And, Instagram did have an exit for approximately $1 billion. Pinterest currently valued at $3 billion. Tumblr bought for $1 billion. I don't necessarily think fast growth social media platforms with no monetization are a great strategy outside the US because, first of all, they're hard and you need to have a lot of financing to kind of survive long enough to get acquired, if that's going to be your plan, or a large amount of sort of eyeballs to monetize on advertising. But there's just not as much of a history of those type of acquisitions outside the US. A lot of folks tend to copy the social media stuff because people use it and it's fun and it looks cool, but it doesn't monetize very well. And so that's not a good recipe. It's not a great recipe in the US. It's a really poor recipe for startups outside the US where there's less access to capital and there's less likelihood of acquisition. So I think it has to be a lot more realistic focus on revenue in the very near term for a lot of businesses outside the US, just because you're going to have less access to capital and you need to sort of prepare for your own path to sustainability without necessarily depending on financing. So I think that's one big lesson. I've kind of been ranting a lot about focusing on unsexy startups and solve real problems and get to monetization early. And there's just lots and lots of those businesses to be done internationally. So that's why something like Bilk that I think focuses on the construction market in Thailand and Indonesia just seems like a really great fundamental. I don't know whether the business will work and whether it will grow, but the fundamentals for that look a lot more solid than something that's based on trying to figure out how to monetize users' social media behavior.
Okay, what about the opposite? What could the Valley learn from Asia? Is there anything the Valley learn from? Is the Valley too high and mighty? In heaven up here above all of us.
We do have big heads sometimes up our asses, so yes, I think there's just not as many people visiting Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, to learn about stuff. I think a lot of initial...
Like our beaches. Really nice.
Well, they may come here for other reasons, but let's... I think there's a lot of great examples of gamification and monetization that came out of Korea and China fairly early that a lot of people in the US did not pay attention to right away. And so those examples were not immediately followed as quickly as they could be. In general, I think international startups are more aware of localization and regional issues, whereas the US, as much as the US tends to be a great culture and country for entrepreneurship and sometimes global entrepreneurship, we're pretty lazy about localizing into other languages and cultures. And a lot of US businesses have been knocked off in other markets. We complain about copycats too much. Like, go fucking do it if you're like complaining about the copycat. The reason those businesses were knocked off in Germany and other languages and cultures is because US entrepreneurs were just lazy about going after non-English speaking markets, sometimes even seeding Canada and Australia and the UK to other entrepreneurs. And I think that for a long time, the English-speaking market in the US was such a big percentage of the overall market, it may have made sense to focus on growing the US market 20% per year rather than trying to grow after the rest of the world, which might not have been even 20 to 30% relative to opportunity. But now the playing field is a lot different, and I think the global GDP available for a business that can be global is probably 3 to 5x the size of the US opportunity. And so I think that necessitates people thinking about going global much sooner, and at least having a game plan for how they're going to go after that. So I think that for most of the entrepreneurs I'm talking to in Southeast Asia, they do have a my country, the region, the world sort of game plan, or at least thinking about that, whereas I don't think most people in the US really pay attention to that stuff.
So does that mean that the Valley's kind of out of touch? Is that why you guys have what, 10 to 15% of your startups are global? Right?
It's probably about 30% of our companies and probably 20% capital weighted. So we haven't doubled down as much internationally, but we're probably a third of our companies are probably outside the US in some form or another. But we're definitely unusual in that regard. Most people in the Valley stick to a 30-mile radius of Northern California, or maybe they invest a little bit in New York and Boston, Seattle and LA. But yeah, there's a lot of, it's natural, they tend to be lazy and focus on the things that have worked for them, and those have been very nearby. And there is, a huge concentration of, great entrepreneurs and great businesses in, the San Francisco Bay Area, but more and more, I think that's going to change.
Are you looking to get, even more? What's the ideal percentage for you in terms of global? 250 startups in Silicon Valley, 250, and how many in Asia?
We're limited in how fast we can grow based on people and capital, and we're still, a 3-year-old startup ourselves in many ways.
How much money for Southeast Asia?
I think my lawyer's probably going to smack me around right now if I say anything.
That's okay, he's not here.
Yes, he actually is.
Oh. Please leave.
Unfortunately, we didn't get that hungover last night, so I can't.
Can someone get David beer, please?
Yeah, right, there you go. I think that right now we're probably in 6 or 7 countries with feet on the ground. We're probably paying attention to 15 to 20, maybe 30 major metros around the world. So it's not too much of a stretch for me to think that we could get to, people in 20 metros and eyes on 50 metros. I don't know if we can get to people in 50 metros and eyes on more than 100 metros, but still, there's probably easily 100 metros around the world with 10 million people or more that would be worth investing in, at least, a couple $1 million a year, and probably more if we get some success there. But that's me being a little ambitious. We got to figure out how we can get through the next 6 to 12 months before I start planning on the world domination plan.
Okay, I kind of want to shift away from the global Asia kind of talk.
Sure.
So I spent most of the morning watching videos of you.
Really? You should have better things to
I
do
don't
with
know
your
why, First time in Bangkok in 20 years.
You really should find better things to do with your time.
So, and you talked a lot about being crazy. And that being crazy is very important. People should be crazy, blah, blah, blah. So what kind of craziness are you talking about, and how can I be crazy? Should I be crazy? Can I be crazy? Is it okay to be crazy?
I would not take almost anything I say too literally.
Okay. Can we get another guest?
I think there's a interesting combination of paranoia and insanity which works well for entrepreneurs, combined with an ability to lead and take people with you, perhaps over the cliff. But I think you need to be ambitious in your thinking, sometimes ignorant of the potential downside consequences. You also have to be sort of eternally paranoid that people might be trying to kill you, because they possibly are. So I think that combination of schizophrenia is helpful.
Is that something we can train?
Nah.
So it feels like
There's a lot of folks that I've worked with at PayPal who are real social misfits, but were great entrepreneurs. And I think there's some kind of correlation going on there that they're not always great at following the accepted cultural norms, and so they can take shortcuts. I wouldn't necessarily call them psychopathic, but there's David Sachs, who was the founder of Yammer, was my former boss for a short period of time, and he was known for writing extremely terse emails, and also like you would hand him something to look at, and he would just mark it up on the spot. Like very first ad copy that I put together for some developer program came out, and just like ripped through the red pen on it, and I was like, that wasn't that bad. Why is he ripping on my shit? And, I think the lesson I took away from that was he was not as concerned with making me feel good or acceptable social behavior, and he just cut right to the fucking chase. And that might offend a lot of people, but it probably helped him solve problems a lot faster than normal people. So whereas I sit there and I'm thinking about, oh, how do I put smiley faces in this email and make the person feel okay, and like, let me make sure I put this stuff up top or something, and he's just like, bang, bang, boom, done. doesn't care whether like that person's crying because they read that email. It's like, oh, your shit sucks, fix it. So I think there, and on the flip side, like I remember like talking to him sometimes, and he was always fucking paranoid as hell about everything. Card associations, eBay, Russian fraudsters, attorney generals. And he was right, they were all trying to kill us, so it like wasn't an irrational fear. So there was kind of this both being directed to the point and kind of trying to stay alive while being aware of all the shit that was falling on around you. I don't know if I'm getting to a point with this conversation.
But I wonder, I mean, because in Asia, we're like super polite, and at least
yeah,
in Vietnam.
So the thing is, like, if you're following the rules, you have no advantages because most people follow the rules, right? And so if you're trying to find a competitive edge against somebody else and you're all following the rules, it's going to be hard, right? Because you're trying to go down the same path, right? Here's the lines, and 1,500 others are trying to follow that same path to get an advantage. Whereas, like, the rule breakers are like, oh, let's go over here. And they might be over a cliff, but it might be they also find a Maserati and like cut the front. And like, you know, so, and you might get arrested, but entrepreneurship, I think, is about finding shortcuts that don't kill you or get you in jail. And rule followers are a disadvantage to people who are willing to take those shortcuts. Now, they may die, but they may find a quicker path to Hawaii, too.
And what about fearlessness? Is that something that we need?
You know, most people are not going to die from doing startups, but
Most people.
not to put a downer on it, but yes, we've had 3 deaths in the portfolio over the last year and a half. So, invest in a lot of companies, people do die. It's not really intentionally funny. Yeah, I mean, these days, at least for a lot of people, the risks aren't as great, although in more formal cultures, I think you do still face the risk of shame and, you know, probably having a black mark on your business or career. If you fail at a startup in the UK or Japan, that can actually have very significant consequences for you. But in most places, I don't think, as long as you're not psychologically impacted by failing at a startup, you can learn a lot from failing. So I think that we shouldn't worship failure, but shouldn't be afraid of it either. So,
what do you do when you do fail? Or like, you know, like here, like if the society is down on me, then I'm like, oh shit, you know. So yeah, what do I do in that case? What's my?
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into this. Like, failure is not a binary event. Well, when you run out of money, it is. But like, there's lots of little points of things that don't work, and your awareness of how the product, the marketing, the financing, your leadership or lack thereof, all those things have, you know, not explicit success and failure moments. They have kind of a gray zone of success and failure. You're always trying to adjust for the things that are going on. I think you just need to be not afraid of negative feedback and take that on a continuous basis to improve your behavior, your team. This is sort of boring talk right now.
All right, well, I'll shift away. Oh, what about, I saw a slide that you showed a few months ago. Features, users, and money. And in the middle, you have Nirvana.
This was a discussion of platforms, yeah.
Discussion of platforms. So what's the secret? How do I get to that middle, that Nirvana?
Well, I wouldn't worry about getting to the middle. I think the point I was trying to make with that slide was that of those 3 things, the reason we talk about platforms and well, how I analyze platforms is they give you access to features, they give you access to users, maybe they give you access to monetization. The users part of that is probably what's most relevant, because I think it's not impossible to build a product. There's still lots of risks there, but the engineering and design and other parts of that, if you're not an idiot, you should be able to build some kind of functional use product and hopefully find some customers. But I think the major issue for a lot of companies, once they get past maybe the first 6 to 18 months of growing pains, is figuring out how to build a very scalable business. And the companies that I've been part of that have had success there usually have had success because they jumped on somebody else's platform that helped them grow dramatically fast. So PayPal with eBay, YouTube with MySpace, I don't know, Facebook kind of, built its own way in a little bit of a sense, but they were operating in a platform which was initially US colleges and universities. So awareness of what the platform of users you are kind of getting at and how that can help your business, I think is really important, and we tend to overlook that a lot. So the platforms that I was mentioning before, Google and search, Facebook and Twitter and social, Android and Apple and mobile, YouTube and video. Those 6 platforms are mostly global billion-user platforms or more. And I don't think we pay attention to them enough in terms of advanced techniques for user acquisition. So there's a lot of people who spend a ton of time learning programming, various stacks, various disciplines, 5 to 10 years maybe in school or on their own learning about the discipline of programming. Similarly, you have a lot of people who spend a lot of time learning about the discipline of design, whether that's visual or other UX. I don't think people spend anywhere near that amount of time understanding online internet marketing. Probably because the disciplines are just so new and they change so fast, it's really hard to have an academic approach to a lot of that stuff. But it's astonishing to me how much time people spend on engineering and design and how little they spend on marketing. And it's not the traditional marketing. It's very analytically driven in many cases. It's tied closely to product. But there's just lots and lots and lots of learning for us as a society and individual entrepreneurs in their own rights to figure that stuff out. And it matters a lot. Like relative to the things that actually have impact on your startup, you're probably at 80% of your competency in engineering, you're probably at 50% of your competency on design, but you're probably not even at 20% of your competency on marketing. And that's the most important thing in many cases.
Okay,
I say that as an engineer who's starting out as an engineer.
I only have a few more minutes and then I'm going to open up to the crowd, but I have 2 more questions. What is your biggest mistake and what do you learn from it? Someone asked this on Twitter, so I had to ask.
I have so many mistakes to choose from.
Only one.
I mean, I feel very lucky in my life. I actually don't need to dwell on things that I have made mistakes at. Probably not starting a startup early enough. My first startup actually was kind of an arc of about 7 years, so it just took a long time. 2 years solo, 3 years with about, between 2 to 20 other people, and then about 1.5 years post-acquisition. And, it was kind of a lame story. It wasn't really an amazing company, it wasn't an amazing exit. I spent a lot of time on it. And I think the experiences that I had over the course of those 6 or 7 years could have been compressed into maybe 1 to 3 years. I don't dwell on that too much, but I think the opportunity for a lot of people doing startups these days is a quick path to failure, and you can restart, hopefully within a 3 month to 2 year period. So compressing the lessons of failure into a short period of time is probably something I wish I had been able to do rather than spend 20 years to figure shit out.
And I guess just want to any takeaway, you got I don't know, 130 people here. Anything that you would like to, as a final takeaway to everybody before we go to questions?
This is my grand wisdom from all of Thailand.
From the Sith Lord.
Find a customer, solve their problem, make some money, figure out how to scale. It's kind of straightforward. Do something that matters to you selfishly.